I'm Jason Witt, Director of La Crosse County Human Services, and real excited about introducing the presenters today. Curt Teff from La Crosse Schools, Officer Heath Graves from the City of La Crosse Police Department, and Mandy Bisek from La Crosse County Juvenile Justice. Going to be talking about some great collaborations in juvenile justice and really making a lot of strides. A lot of people, a lot of folks from the community involved in this work, realizing in juvenile justice, like in so many areas, there's so many good things happening in this community. But when we work together and understand what different parts of our system is doing, we can do even greater things. And going back to, especially with this issue, what Dr. West talked about, that we're not going to be able to have a juvenile justice system that is as effective as we want it to be without having some of the difficult discussions around race as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the presenters and Mandy Bisek.
Thank you, Jason. All right, thank you. Good afternoon. This is our second round of presentations. The first time we presented, we were able to present to our local school administrators, which was a great crowd to be able to talk about some of the specific work that we've been doing. And I'll tell you what I told some of them in that, timing of this is very interesting in that we're a work in progress right now. But what we hope to show you today is some of the historical information that has brought us to where we're at, and as well as where we're hoping to go with some ideas and thoughts about collaborative efforts moving forward. So, agenda for today. First of all, we want to talk a little bit about trends in juvenile justice. This is what got us talking in the first place. The second order of business will be understanding and supporting youth. What can we do in today's system, which we are all collaboratively a part of in the juvenile justice system, different decision points along the way. What can we collaboratively do to support and understand our youth and work smarter together is finally what we need to discuss today. A little background to start us off. So in 2008, La Crosse County Juvenile Justice System requested that the Carey Group come to to do an assessment of how our current juvenile justice practices were working at that point in time. It looked at a number of different factors within our La Crosse County juvenile justice system. Of the many, many findings that they were able to find and recommendations that they were able to make to us as a system, there were a couple of findings that went untouched for a number of years, which brings us to where we're at today. The first finding was that La Crosse County juvenile arrest rates are much higher than both the state and 3 like-sized counties. Now, at the time in 2008, that was not a part of the scope of what the Carey Group was there to do. However, they encouraged us to look into this, which you'll find more about in just a second. The second finding that they had was that statewide, the state of Wisconsin, the data suggested that disproportionate minority contact factors were present in the state of Wisconsin, and that they may be similarly prevalent in La Crosse County. Now, at that point in time, we didn't have the racial data available to us within the study, nor was it within the scope of what the Carey Group came to do. However, they said, these factors are among the state of Wisconsin, and La Crosse County, you probably should look into this yourselves as well. So the first recommendation that the Carey Group made to us here in La Crosse County Juvenile Justice was to seek assistance from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, specifically with their Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. It's the Annie E. Casey Foundation that's nationally renowned and works with several states across the country about disproportionate minority contacts, as well as diversionary options, keeping kids out of the system and ultimately out of detention facilities. With that recommendation, that was terrible slide, as we pointed out in the last session. Yellow on yellow doesn't work very well. But what this is telling us is that that's the first area that we looked into doing. So with the assistance of the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Department of Justice here in Wisconsin, Wisconsin has been pegged as a new JDAI site with 3 local counties already in the process of JDAI initiative. Racine, Manitowoc, and Milwaukee. La Crosse County has been pegged as a Tier 2 site. So what the Department of Justice said is that, hey, La Crosse County, we want to get you ready. We want your juvenile justice system and all of its partners to be ready to go when the Annie E. Casey Foundation comes in and assists you with JDAI initiatives. So with that, we've had 3 years of grant funding from the Department of Justice, assisting us with our collaborative efforts of really delving into and looking at arrest rates and disproportionate minority contacts within the juvenile justice system here in La Crosse County. The second recommendation that the Carey report suggested was to create an interagency task force to study why La Crosse County arrests a disproportionate number of youth and determine if this is the best interest of the public. Now, what the Carey group told us is, again, this isn't within our scope to be able to delve into exactly what the reasoning is behind why juvenile justice or juvenile arrest rates in La Crosse seems to be higher, not only than 3 like-sized counties, what they compared to, but also when we look at rates, higher than the state of Wisconsin as well. They had no idea what this was, but what they encouraged us to do is come up with a work group that would tackle this situation in and of itself and come to understand exactly what this is about. At the end of the day, they said, if La Crosse County understands what those arrest rates are about and we can be okay with them, we at least need to understand and move forward. However, if we look into them further and we're not okay with what's going on here in our community, we need to delve in further to determine what it exactly is that we can do differently to decrease our arrest rates here. So with that recommendation, the Arrest and Disproportionate Minority Contact Task Force was assembled in 2013. The purpose of this task force was to study why La Crosse County arrests a disproportionate number of youth in comparison to other Wisconsin counties, as well as to study racial disproportionality in the La Crosse County juvenile justice system. So the first question that the task force really looked into was answering the question, since the Carey group was here, their data ended in 2006, do we continue to show the same trends now, today, that we did back in 2008 when the Carey group came? Another terrible graph for y'all to look at, so I'll walk you through it. What it's coming to say is that from the cutoff in 2006 until 2012, which was further data that we collected, La Crosse County continues to trend as having more arrest rates than like-sized counties, comparable counties being Fond du Lac, Sheboygan, and Walworth counties. Now, what you may or may not be able to see is that pretty little blue line on the top is ours. Everyone else continues to trend downward. However, in 2010 and 2011, La Crosse County, for some reason, started to spike up again with our arrest rates. So we answered our first question as a task force. We do continue to have this issue of having higher juvenile arrest rates here in La Crosse County. What the reasoning behind it was what our mission was as a task force. One of the other areas that we were tackling was, does disproportionate minority contact exist here in La Crosse County when it comes to our juvenile population? Our original report that came out from our task force talked about DMC existing at about 9 times the rate. So of all of, as we compare our African-American youth to our white youth being arrested in the city of La Crosse, we were looking at about 9 times the rate. As we've continued to work with our data and look into it a little bit further, we're still seeing that we're about 4 to 5 times of our African-American youth are being arrested, 4 to 5 times more than our white youth in our community. Nevertheless, no matter where the numbers land in the end as we continue this work, we're seeing that we have a DMC issue here in La Crosse County. One of the other areas that we were able to tackle with our data is, what are our kids doing? All right, if we have all of these kids that are getting arrested in La Crosse County, what is it that's making up these arrests so that we can start to point in a direction of where we could make the most change? This chart shows us kind of our top 10 reasons for arrest. Number 1 being disorderly conduct. Now, if anyone knows Wisconsin state statute, disorderly conduct is kind of a catch-all category. Disorderly conduct can be, raising your voices in the hallways, causing a disturbance, throwing a snowball, anything that may cause a disturbance within those around you. So as we can see here, we're at about 26% of all charges from 2008 to 2012, were for disorderly conduct. Of all of those disorderly conducts, 37% of them were committed by an African-American youth. We then look down at our next 2 categories of why kids are being arrested in our community, and they're for pickup orders and juvenile custody. These aren't charges. These are incidents. These are things that happen with youth that we want to ensure are on someone's radar, that something's going to happen with them, but not necessarily an arrest. So pickup orders are, for those who don't know, pickup order is when a juvenile is on supervision with the county, much like probation in the adult world, and a violation of their court order occurs. One option may be that a pickup order is issued for detainment as a consequence. Those pickup orders are being tallied in with our arrests right now is what we're coming to find, which in all reality, they're not necessarily charges. The third category is juvenile custody. Here's another area where good intentions really may have caused us some numbers in this particular category. Juvenile custody really being more for our runaway kids who have run away from their homes, and officers who respond to calls to get kids reunited with their parents. With best intentions, as has been the hypothesis throughout this entire task force, with best intentions, we want to make sure that those kids are getting help. There's something going on in those homes, right? There's something causing them to run away from home, and we want to make sure to not only reunify them, but get them the help they need to stay and get what they need. So what better way than to turn to the county, who is full of helpers, to get them the help that they need? So that returned to us as a referral to juvenile justice. Not necessarily a chargeable offense by any means, but really wanting to open that door to help for kids. So in our top three categories, two of which aren't even necessarily charges, it's opened our eyes to conversations that need to occur in the current practice of what we do within the juvenile justice system. I should mention too, as we have worked in the last 3 years for system reform improvements and improving our different decision-making points, all parties who have come to the table, which are a lot of parties, and you'll see that later in our presentation, who is all comprised at our table, have come together with one thing in common, that at the end of the day, our best intentions are to get kids help. And at this point in time, the door that we've created to get many of these kids help is entry into the system. How do we create other doors? How do we create and divert kids from the juvenile justice system, the child protection system, whatever system it may be that could have the potential for larger issues to occur down the road? How do we create new doors for them to get the help they need sooner? This slide demonstrates, again, yellow on yellow isn't working for us, but this slide demonstrates that we are not alone in our efforts here, that other counties, other agencies, other states are looking at these same types of trends and the same types of things. This first slide talks about, and it's a study from the state of Florida that talks about kids who enter into the system at varying levels. First of all, what are their chances of entering into to be incarcerated as an adult? So for those kids who just briefly enter the juvenile justice system, they're 2 times more likely to be incarcerated as an adult in the state of Florida. For those kids who actually have supervision, enter the system, are placed on supervision, they're 14 times more likely to be incarcerated as an adult. And for those kids who are detained in a high-end placement, they're 38 times more likely to be incarcerated by an adult, or as an adult. The other screen shows how being incarcerated as a youth and being detained as a youth increases their use of alcohol, illicit drugs, and dropping out of school, as compared to those who are not detained. This next slide is also from Florida. It talks about how treatment, we have come to learn through research, treatment is much better and more conducive to better outcomes than punishment, and how at the same time, it's also more cost effective. So getting kids the treatment at the right time is going to be more cost effective than putting them in high-end placements and detention facilities. So that brings us to some current practices. In the 3 years that we've all been working together as a collaborative, we've really come to learn one another's systems. And I think that was really the first step that we all needed to take in our venture to system reform, is learning what La Crosse County Human Services is doing, what the School District of La Crosse is doing, what La Crosse police departments are doing, and understanding that at the end of the day, we've been doing a lot of the same things. Our philosophies have really been shifting and changing to things that are more evidence-based, to practices that are more assessment-based, really reeling in on the needs of each individual kiddo that we're working with, and making sure that we're pairing those needs with the appropriate services and the appropriate interventions. Little did we know that we were all doing this work on parallel roads, and now it's time for our roads to start merging. So for La Crosse County Juvenile Justice, we've taken what we've learned from those assessments, from the Carey group coming in and things like that, and we've really changed some policies and practices. One of the first and really more recent practices that have been changed is the appropriate use of detention. So those youth who are have committed a crime and are worthy of being detained in either our secure facility or our shelter facility for protection of the community, at one point in time was decisions were made based on training, experience, the situation that's going on. Let's hear the story from our officers and let's make a mutual decision together. We've added a layer to that. We've added a layer that makes it more objective in our decision making to ensure that the most appropriate kids are being detained in our facilities and that alternatives are being sought for those kids who aren't the most high risk in our secure facilities. Another practice that has changed over time, and this has been a few years in the making now, is using more evidence-based assessments. Now those youth that are referred to our county juvenile justice system are being assessed, not only doing intake inquiries, getting the family story, using our training, using our expertise, again, adding that layer of objective decision making, assessing a youth and their family for the true needs that they're coming in on, and making those decisions on whether or not that youth enters our juvenile justice system or is diverted, first and foremost. And if they enter our system, what needs are we identifying and seeking to focus on while we work with them? And finally, we're really putting a lot of efforts and investment into treatment-based practices and approaches, really pulling in our services to utilize our social workers, our staff within our county as the brokers of services and the service providers themselves, rather than pushing our kids out to other service providers. We're really making sure that the training that our social workers are gaining and obtaining are intervention-based, treatment-based, and evidence-based in what they're doing to create the most change possible. And then I'm going to hand it over here to my teammates to talk about some of their current practices as well.
So our current practices for the police department is that we work with the schools. We don't always necessarily, on every occasion that somebody gets sent down to the office and stuff like that, we don't necessarily automatically charge them with disorderly conduct or anything like that. We work with the school and we work with the kids to come to some agreement. I know some of the SROs have been worried about that this is all going to change and now we're not going to charge anybody and stuff like that. It's not really going to change what we're currently doing because right now if we want to get kids help, we have to go through, we have basically one door to go through, and that's refer them to social services to maybe, not that we want them to get in trouble, but we want to get them some services or some help, and that's kind of our only avenue that we have right now. And with this collaboration, we're going to try to create more doors so that we don't have to just use the county as to get the juveniles some services. We'll be able to do direct referrals. If we're dealing with a student or a kid that maybe has an anger management issue, we can send them to the appropriate training and stuff like that so that they can get some help. And just to continue in expectations, that we're just going to continue where we're going, and that this isn't something new that we're doing. It's more putting that on paper so that if there's a turnover in JJ, the schools, or the school resource officers, that we all still keep going down the same path that we are, instead of bringing a new philosophy to come in. And now Curt's going to talk about school district.
Great, thanks. So this collaborative really gave us a great opportunity to share our story about La Crosse schools with different agency stakeholders. And relative to the work that the county is doing around juvenile justice best practice, the schools have been thinking about similar concepts for about 7 years. And so out of this work, we really had a chance to tell our story around universal positive behavioral interventions and supports. About 7 years ago, we really recognized that traditional school discipline models weren't working either. In fact, a lot of the evidence is in zero tolerance types of school environments, schools will actually see an increase in antisocial behavior in those sorts of environments. And so we began thinking about schools as systems, and how do you support student behavior in more positive and proactive ways. So all of our schools have achieved Tier 1 status, which means that all of them have established school-wide expectations. So knowing that in the old school model, there's a lot of variety in terms of what teachers expected from environment to environment, and those weren't clear, school teams now have established their own school-wide expectations that are clear to students and to staff. One of the other pieces is we know that most behavior is learned, and with that being the basis, we spend quite a bit of time in schools teaching kids expectations, rehearsing expectations, kickoffs at the beginning of the year, booster sorts of trainings when they come back from break. And again, we're asking them to apply skills to a unique context, a school environment that may have been different within their home, community, or neighborhood. Another part that we have installed is positive reinforcement, that we want to be systematic in terms of the ways that we reinforce positive behaviors. So how do we increase the likelihood that adults will interact with kids in positive ways? And so we have teams that look at this and build that within their own school systems. Discipline is still part of the equation, but it's not the sole part of the equation. But what's been important about how we handle discipline is as much variability as there was in expectations, there was just as much variability in terms of how schools responded to problem behavior, what was considered a minor behavior versus a major behavior. And we've tightened up systems around that and made sure that our interventions are designed to address the behavior at hand and reduce the likelihood that it's going to reoccur. As we continue to look at our data and continue to build our systems of support, we're actually getting into advanced tiers of training, it's called. But really looking at for kids who aren't necessarily responding to the universal supports, how do we support them differently? And across our system, across La Crosse schools, about 90% of the kids respond to universal Tier 1. So we're really talking about how do we support this 10% a little bit different. All of the interventions that we're now beginning to train schools on and install within our schools are all based around this concept of how do we increase engagement. And what you're going to find is that lines up really well with our work with the county in terms of engaging youth, engaging families, and engaging community stakeholders and supports around kids. So one of our first guiding questions in this work was, are there delinquent acts that we believe may be more effectively treated with intervention and a system of graduated responses than with court-imposed punishments? And as we began that discussion and we're looking at patterns related to what are kids being referred to and what types of kids are these, what we're finding is the bulk of these referrals are coming from kids who are adolescents. Right? We haven't had major challenging behaviors into childhood, but we have this developmental milestone. And we see this even within our office referral data within schools that, our 9th and 10th grade numbers seem to elevate, and as kids get older, they seem to perform a little bit better within our schools. And so thinking about that, adolescents are just a different breed, right? And their development and how their brain works really will have an impact on what sorts of interventions we should be doing with them and how we should be interacting with them. So we have a quick video here just talking about that the idea of adolescent development and juvenile justice, and knowing that kids are going to make mistakes and do things that might cause problems within schools. Is it a good idea to criminalize those sorts of behaviors, even though we might even expect it out of adolescence?
My name is Elizabeth Coughlin. I'm in the Psychology and Social Behavior Department in the School of Social Ecology. The main focus of my research is on adolescent development, how kids change, how they develop over time, and that really informs or provides the court with a foundation for better understanding how to treat kids within the system. So a lot of my work is on When should kids be tried as adults? Are they competent to stand trial? What are the right responses that the justice system should have to kids during this developmental time period? So a lot of my research centers on, if adolescents are so smart, why do they do such stupid things? A lot of kids end up making very immature decisions, and better trying to understand what that disconnect is. So recent advances in neuroscience have shown that the brain is continuing to develop up until the age of 25. And that's particularly in the area of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control, planning, future orientation, given that this is the last part of the brain to develop. And a lot of people think that if you committed a serious crime, you must be a serious offender, and that life is over, that this is a person that cannot be rehabilitated. And what we wanted to do was look at what predicts who stops offending, who desists from criminal activity. A lot of people look at the predictors of what gets kids into crime. Very few people look at what gets kids out of crime. One of the things we know from our findings is that as kids mature, the more likely they are to stop offending. The most exciting way that I've seen my research impact policy is having the Supreme Court take up the issue of the death penalty for juvenile offenders. It's hard to believe that the United States was one of the last countries to still execute their children. So my research not only impacted the abolishment of the juvenile death penalty, but it also was involved in the recent 2010 abolishment of life without the possibility of parole for non-homicide cases for juvenile offenders. And to know that my research had an impact on the policies of this country was very exciting. We're starting a new study called Crossroads. They were interested in looking at whether kids who are formally processed, that is, they go through the regular court system, maybe are incarcerated, versus kids who are informally processed, that is, diverted, given maybe community service or some community-based response. So we're going to look as they get older what the educational, mental health, emotional, as well as economic impact of all of these factors are on kids who are formally punished or informally processed through the system. Because what you do to a kid at this age has a long-term impact on what they're going to do as an adult. So it's really important to know what the system does so that we can look long-term to how they're going to behave as an adult. And I think that's one of the goals of research is once we better understand how kids are changing, what their needs are, can we design a system that's more developmentally appropriate to meet those needs?
And so in La Crosse, we're asking that same very question. Is there just a better way to do things that can help support healthy adolescent development and not track kids into a criminal justice system that they'll end up in as adults? Adolescence really is nicely captured in this quote here. It says, adolescence is society's permission slip for combining physical maturity with psychological irresponsibility, right? And when we look across our high school populations, we have boys and girls who look like young men and young ladies, but their brains are not quite there yet. They're still developing. And like I said, within our office discipline referral, we can see this clear point where you can see the majority of adolescents are beginning to mature, and those office discipline referrals begin to fade off. Looking at brain research, and this was in the video as well, we know that that front part of the brain isn't fully developed until age 25, but it's responsible for critical executive function skills, and these particular ones are related to behavior, impulse control, emotional control, ability to think flexibly, in self-monitoring. And what we need to be aware of as adults, just knowing that this is in typically developing kids, that they're neurologically wired to do some stupid things. And we can expect that, right? We know that's going to happen. We know what adolescent development can look like. How is it best to respond to that? In addition to typical development, if that weren't challenging enough, we know that the impact of trauma is profound, and our speakers this morning talked about ACEs data and what impact adolescents combined with kids who've been exposed to toxic stress, right, that low-level stress that never goes away, how their brains are different and how those are developing differently than even our typical kids. But we know that children who've experienced complex trauma more likely to fail a grade in school, drop out of schools, have problems with language, have suicidal ideation, be suspended or expelled, and more likely to be arrested. And again, in our thinking within our public schools. Our focus going into Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions, intensive interventions with kids, is going to be building relationships with kids and this focus on engagement. How do we engage youth and their families and community resources differently to leverage different outcomes down the road for all students?
So we wanted to bring the issue of trauma a little bit closer to home, just to kind of give us an idea of the impact that we might be seeing on the kiddos that are coming into our juvenile justice system. So at La Crosse County, since May of 2014, we have been informally collecting data on the ACEs. So every kiddo that enters our secure detention facility or our shelter facility at every single intake, meaning if Johnny comes in 5 times, he gets it 5 times, right? Also meaning those kids that are detained or placed in our facilities that are outside of La Crosse County, just to kind of give you a scope of what we're collecting here. We want to see how many of those kids that are entering our facilities are self-reporting something on the ACEs. And so what we've come to find since May of 2014, over 500 kids we've had do a self-report, 70% of them are self-reporting at least one traumatic event in their lives. Of those 70% of kids, 38% have reported 3 or more traumatic events in their lives. So it leads us to the question, just like we heard this morning, when we're talking about trauma in the kids that we're dealing with, a lot of the behaviors that have gotten them into one of our facilities are those surface behaviors. And what are we as community providers, as school administrators, as social workers for the county, as police officers, so on and so on? What are we doing to see what's under the surface and help those kiddos to keep them from placement, from detention, from getting involved in the juvenile justice system and things of that nature, helping them at an earlier stage?
So we're going to talk about a street versus school. Out in the street, officers, they don't have the luxuries that the school resource officers do, that we get to know the kids, get to know their backgrounds, get to know what kind of baggage they're bringing with. The street officer comes to a situation, he's got to handle that situation, get it taken care of. If that's a report, a referral, an arrest, something like that, where you have to just take care of that situation at that moment, and then you move on to the next situation. Where with the school resource officers, you have a luxury of getting to know the kids, getting to know the families, knowing what kind of stuff is going on in the home. If you have a kid that blows up in the classroom, as school resource officers, we might have the information that, okay, maybe there was just a search warrant that was done on the house last night. They were up all night. So now when the kid goes to class, teacher says, well, why don't you have your homework done? Kid just that's the last straw. Kid blows up and gets sent down to the office. Well, instead of just having to deal with the situation where he blew up in class, we have the knowledge and work with the school staff to let them know the background so that we can handle the situation different. And then part of the criteria for being an SRO is to kind of have that mindset, because when you become to be an SRO, you have to go through an application process. Even though you're a police officer, it's not just, okay, you're going to go be an SR in the school. You have to, when a position opens up, you have to apply, put in like a resume, what your training is, what your qualifications are, and then you go through another interview process with school resource officer, has to go in front of a board where it's part police officers from the department and part school district administration, where you actually go through an interview process, and then between the school and the police department, they figure out who's the best fit, who they want to have in there. And like I said, the hiring process involves the school district and the police department, so that it's not just an appointed position. I know there's one police department in the county that used to be a appointed position for 3 years. It just, okay, this officer was there for 3 years. Okay, now his 3 years is done. The next guy goes in. You always don't get the greatest fit or the correct fit that goes along with that.
Great. So this created, a context where we got a chance to share about our systems within this large group. We have a better idea of what the data is telling us there's a problem. And it led to another question. Can we as a community, as school, county, city, municipal court, circuit court, can we systematically improve juvenile justice and community responses to delinquent acts using a continuum of treatment options and system of graduated responses? We're not the only communities or the only community who has taken on these issues, and I'm going to show you another clip here just about what this looks like, what this collaborative can look like, and the potential we have to really reshape lives in our community.
I've been in this county since 1973. It's gone through a lot of changes, and the dramatic changes began after the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. We began to see a shift in demographics.
There's repeated family patterns of dysfunction that have infiltrated almost all areas of their life, whether it be from poor social skills or school performance.
We have a problem in this country in which we are not really thinking the right way about how we address crime.
We are targeted just because of our scandal, so that's already one strike against us. And then the fact that we're made us are 2 strikes. So the fact that you're coming out here as a young black man, you're trying to make something happen, do better for your life, do better for your family, those around you, it's a little difficult.
The inspiration for the Second Chance Court program was a gentleman named Oscar. So he was arrested. When I saw Oscar brought in those handcuffs and heard him speak, and the fact that this was a young man who had no prior history, how smart and intelligent, how articulate he was, I was looking at somebody who could be a great person, who could do something great in his future. And you know what? I also knew that if I sent him to prison, I'd knock him off that road to success. I'd knock him off.
Clayton County community institutions realized there were too many students like Oscar falling out of school and heading into the criminal justice system. In order to address this problem at its root, they formed a multi-stakeholder partnership between the juvenile court, the school district, and local organizations like Tips for Teens, the Center for Adolescent Male Development and their Young CEO Institute, and Grace Harbor Health Clinic that aims to provide comprehensive services that will help young males achieve in the classroom, develop career goals, and make healthy decisions. This expansive new model is what they call the system of care.
The mission of the kind of the system of care and the core message that they aim to seek to deliver is in school, out of court, and onto a positive and healthy future.
We needed to take the best of all that we were doing and put it under one umbrella organization, and with a backbone agency driving the purpose. We had programs that were delinquency focused for kids that were already in the system. We had programs that were intervention focused for schools, and we are adding another piece for kids with dependency issues of deprivation and of truancy.
2 years ago, I was always talking, I just didn't pay attention enough to where I could do the work on my own. I have improved more. I've been paying more attention to my teachers, doing more work and focusing more on learning than talking to others.
A program like this is especially needed for a child who's being raised by a grandmother and his parents are not in the picture because they need the guidance that sometimes grandmothers can't provide. I truly would not be able to give him the knowledge and the information that Tips for Teens gives him.
Each one of these young men that comes into our doors is already brilliant in and of themselves. Our task is to pull it out. So it's a strength-based approach.
In 6th grade, I think I got in trouble a little bit, 20 times maybe. 7th grade, about 10, and then this current grade, 8th grade, I've been in trouble twice, I think. So I think that's really helping me do the right thing and succeed in life. Participating in the Young CEO for me is like having my father here with me. It's like it fills in that hole in my heart that kind of replaces him, puts him in that place.
The system of care is not only a system of providing providers from all different vantage points depending upon the needs of the child, but it's also broadening the age group and going as young as possible so that we can look at prevention instead of detention.
Tips and Teens makes me a better leader for my brother, because whatever I do, he most likely does, and he copies it, and he does it over and over again. So if I do good in Tips and Teens and be more respectful to people and do the right things, he will most likely do it.
It helps us look back on our past and better ourselves from the mistakes we've made.
I see success in my future. I feel like I can tell my children when I grow up, I made it.
So our group was lucky enough to work with Judge Teskey in May. Judge Teskey and his technical assistance team came up and did some compression planning with a number of different stakeholders, really in trying to develop this memorandum of understanding and these systems of how we're going to support youth in different ways. Within our stakeholder group, there was really two groups that emerged. One group is who's got to nickel down on this, right? Who's going to be involved, and it's going to be resources and decision-making processes, things like that. Those were signing partners. So La Crosse School District, La Crosse County, City of La Crosse Police Department, and then our circuit court judges. And the whole goal with that group was to develop this memorandum of understanding that would help shape what these system improvements would look like. We also had a broad advisory stakeholder group, and bring up just a list of all the different folks involved. But these folks provided perspective from the community, perspectives from different community agencies on what this work could look like. Some of our other hope is that some of these advisory members could potentially turn into service providers or alternatives or our partners for these graduated responses. So, but a broad representation within our work groups. So this Memorandum of Understanding that is still under development has really two core components. One are focus acts. So when Mandy had that list up of all of the referrals or all the, what do you call them, offenses, I suppose, that were getting to the court with disorderly conduct being at the top, we had to go through and determine, what are we going to focus on? And a lot of that came down to different tools that we wanted to use to help drill down what are offenses that we can have the most impact on. And we don't have those firmed up yet, but I'm pretty safe in saying disorderly conduct will be one of those focus acts that we'll include in there. The second part was the intervention part. What are we going to do differently? Within our schools, we have an informal process for graduated sanctions. We've got building principals and SROs doing counsel and close, facilitating mediation, things like this. This is enhancing services. What are going to be those other doors that Mandy had talked about? So in the development of focus acts, we use different tools. This is one of our tools. Just gave us some structure to think about the different offenses. Will the offense be diverted from a formal petition? If yes, we'd look at it as a focus act. Is it more probable than not the judge will divert or informally adjust the case? Yes, the team wants to look at that for a focus act too, to really drill down what's likely to get to court and what's not. And if it's not likely to get to court, it's potential that nothing or very little could happen. So our best opportunity is to provide intervention for those sorts of focus acts. On the other side, the graduated responses side, we use tools like this that really helped us frame, within disorderly conduct, such a broad spectrum, what are the different levels of that, and what does disorderly conduct look like, and then what's the appropriate response? If a disorderly conduct is related to peer conflict, that might be one type of intervention. If it's related to self-awareness and self-management, that might be another issue. If it's related to AODA, that might be an entirely different issue. So we're really having a lot of conversation about what the system would look like, and this part is heavily under construction right now.
So when we talk about developing this system, it's very much needing to be a collaborative approach. We've come to realize that the juvenile justice system is made up of many partners and also many different decision-making points, right? So the kiddo that gets in an argument with mom in the community, mom's a decision-making point, or gets sent to the office at school, that's a decision-making point. We can go one direction or another. The next step is an officer shows up. There's another decision-making point that can happen. They refer or don't refer to a community service or to juvenile justice. And the list goes on, right? As the farther we get into these different decision-making points, we have the ability to make an impact at each of those. And so how do we work together collaboratively to talk about how we can use what we already have at our disposal and what we could create, pooling our resources and using our imaginations, also utilizing the data to guide us as to what our community needs. As we move more and more into evidence-based practices, approaches, assessment, and decision-making tools and things like this, we're ensuring that the right kids are getting to the right systems. But with that, sometimes we also create gaps in those systems. So how do we fill those gaps along the way as well? So collaboratively, the first thing that we're doing and have been working on for a number of years is enhancing communications. So how do we, as La Crosse County Human Services, La Crosse Police Department, La Crosse School District, and others that are involved with the decisions that are being made with kiddos, how do we talk within the confines of confidentiality and the law and any barriers that come up that, get in our way? How can we talk about these kids' stories? How do we communicate with one another things that have been attempted and tried? And how do we work together as a team to get these kiddos back on the right track? Also realizing that activating multiple systems of care for both the families, the schools, and within the community are highly, highly important. So how do we activate these multiple systems of care without stepping on each other's toes? If you're paying attention. How do we do this without stepping on each other's toes, while at the same time making services accessible to our kids and our families? That in a system that right now, let's face it, we're not easy to navigate. So how do we make it easier for our kiddos and our families to navigate our systems? And then also having that cross-system awareness and integration. As we've worked for the last 3 years on the system reform efforts and making these things more exposed and available to kids and families, we've come to realize, like we said in the beginning, we're doing a lot of the same work. And as we get more partners at the table, as we hear more stories and the way protocols, procedures, things are happening in each other's systems, we're coming to realize that we're kind of on the same page. So how about we all get in the same book, in the same chapter, on the same page, and work together instead of resisting one another? So fact versus myth. What is this and what is it not? What it's not. This is not about being soft on crime. There is a place for kids who get in legal trouble. The juvenile justice system is there to hold kids accountable and protect our community. It's important that we utilize the system for just that. It's not about absolute zero tolerance or prohibition. That we are saying that, absolute zero tolerance in some instances may be appropriate, but we as a community need to understand it and embrace it and know it. This is also not about reducing our court docket for mere convenience. This isn't saying our judges are too busy and so we need to lay off them a little bit. This is about making sure the right kids are getting to those judges. This is about making sure once they are to those judges that we are making appropriate decisions once they get to the judges. Every step of the way, every decision that's being made. What it is about. It's about being smart on crime. It's about using strategic zero tolerance policies. If we're going to put them out there, we need to know them. At this point in time, I don't think we have any zero tolerance policies. We're tolerant of our students, right? We understand that they have stories and we're going to work with them. What it is about, it's about targeting serious offenders, and it's about creating a system for less serious offenders that is strength-based and equips students and their families with needed cognitive and social skills. So meeting them where they're at, providing the needs, the services for the needs that they have. So because we've been able and been very lucky to work with Judge Teskey and his technical assistance team, we stole some of his outcomes to show you. We realize we are not Clayton County, Georgia. We are La Crosse, Wisconsin. We come with our own set of issues, our own set of problems that we want to tackle and take care of. But this is to show you that it's possible. So as Clayton County began their reform efforts, what they came to find in about 2002, and granted their efforts took years to come about, but once their reform efforts began, complaints and petitions to the court began to decrease. What they also began to find, and I know this is very difficult to see again, but what the yellow line that you probably can't see suggests is that as arrest rates were going down, the more efforts that they put in, graduation rates started going up. So what do we expect? Well, we're hoping for more doors. We're hoping to partake on getting earlier interventions to meet youth's needs prior to having to enter the juvenile justice system. We're hoping for our families and our youth to have accessible, broad range of options within the community. So no more barriers, easier accessibility, and us there to help them along the way to access those services. We're hoping to strengthen relationships with students, families, law enforcement, and community supports. I think as the traditional juvenile justice system and decision-making process has gone along the way, we have the best of intentions in mind and always have. We always have. At the end of the day, we want help for our kids. We just might not have been going about it the right ways, or that there could have been more improved ways that we have available to do this. And with that, we need to strengthen and improve the trusting relationships that we have with the families, kids that we serve in our communities. We want to enhance positive outcomes for youth. I think that's where we're all in the business that we're in, right? We want to see our kids succeed, each and every, like Dr. West talked about this morning, each and every kid. And we want to develop equitable mindsets and practices to support youth, especially our youth of color. We can't ignore the numbers that we're beginning to find. As we look into what our arrest data is made up of, what our disciplinary actions are made up of here within our community, we can't ignore what we find. And when we see that the DMC issues are prevalent in our La Crosse community, we need to do something about it. So, in the little bit of time that we have left, do we have any questions or comments for us? Yeah.
So how do we see, I guess, us opening up that communication access? I think your slide up there talked about sometimes we have youth who are in various levels of different support through the county, through the schools, through whatever. How do we get that communication barrier lessened so that we can all, I guess, effectively help the system better?
Right. Well, I can speak from, there's been an enhancing communication subgroup that has been in the works for, a period of time now that has been tackling that specific issue in and of itself. We're all bound by HIPAA, right? Confidentiality. These are kids that we're dealing with, so we have to be very clear in what we're able to work within. But it's also understanding what those barriers are, I think, getting our own legal departments involved, understanding at the end of the day what needs to be done in order to be able to speak to one another. And the more that we've done this work, I think that communication is key. What comes up time and time again in our large stakeholders group is talking about, if I know when I receive a referral that you guys at the office in the school, or the liaison officers, or the teachers, or the counselors, or the social workers have all done, this number of things prior to referring to human services, well, I kind of know then where I need to begin. Maybe not so much down here, but maybe up here, right? And how do we work together? Because I think the other big thing that even through experience, working one kid at a time, one family at a time, is when kids know, when families know that we're a team, we're all on that team together, we all know that underlying story and we're working with you, right? We're coming from the same place of help. I think we have better outcomes at the end of the day. It's working through the barriers that exist, right? Each and every kid and what their circumstances bring us. I don't know what you guys have.
Yeah, I think relative to communication, the group knows what it wants. You know, we need better context for all these decision points that Mandy talked about earlier, and we're committed to finding the way to get there. I think some of the screeners that the county is used right now, without the communication, we could have potentially some kids who we've worked hard on who would come in and might be just with that tool and the way that it's designed, without any other context, they might be screened out or, yeah. So we do want people who are going to be making decisions relative to intake or relative to bench decisions to have the context they need to make informed choices on kids. So we know what we want. We're committed to finding out how to get to that point. So, other questions? All right, excellent. Thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.